Hello and welcome to Start the Beat with Sykes. My name is Sykes and this is my podcast. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone who checked out the last episode. If you're one of those people, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and thanks so much for coming back. But for everyone out there who's new to the show, welcome. Feel free to make yourselves at home. And as always, there's beer and soda or water in the fridge. Cheers, my friends. Hope you're all doing well today. I'm doing my best to not touch the table because I have affixed the cameras to a tripod that attaches to the table, and I kind of disregarded the fact that it's going to make the camera shake like crazy every time I put my arm down. So it might be a bumpy ride this episode, but for those of you tuning in, I'm sitting down today with my friend Blayne Smith. Blayne is a comedian. He is a live streamer. He is a heavy metal music reviewer on YouTube. A man of many hats. This is a really cool chat. I think you're going to dig it. So let's hop over to my conversation with Blayne Smith right here, right now. Sit back, relax, and let's start the motherfucking beat! How's it going, my friend?
It's going pretty good. How about you?
Not too bad. It's a Thursday, and you know what that means. It means absolutely nothing. Because nothing means anything anymore.
Yeah, Thursdays is the day that I play Zoom poker with human beings I used to see every day almost.
Oh, well, hey, thanks for taking time out of your gambling.
It happens after. It all synced up perfectly.
Perfect. Well, I am rolling here, so there's really not much that you need to know. We're just going to talk about, I guess, like things related to heavy metal, things not related to heavy metal. I'm going to try not to be a typical fuck in a King Diamond t-shirt as best as I possibly can be right now. I got on the camera. I'm like, motherfucker, why am I wearing this now? But like, I'm also not going to change it because like that would be even worse. So
start changing your clothes, get someone in doing the makeup, some lighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually have way too many lights in the room right now. So the Zoom podcast stuff is a little bit newer for me as it is with everybody. I've been doing the podcast shit for a while, but this is newer. And I was like, okay, I'm going to set up some lights and a couple screens and a couple cameras so I could see everything. And now that I'm like looking at it, I'm like, man, this sucks. Like it's really distracting. I don't know like who or what to look at, but hey, you're probably no stranger to looking at cameras and screens and talking to people on the internet. So my friend, Blayne Smith, make some noise for the internet. Woo!
Hello, internet. Yay. We're here. We're doing it.
So, for those of you on the internet that do not know, Blayne, you are a comedian, you are a music video reviewer, a live streamer, and a human being on planet Earth, currently residing in the land of Canada.
That's correct. That's all correct.
Nice.
You've done your research.
Is there anything that I missed?
That seems like enough things. That's it's like I'm not trying to be Doctor Mr. Blayne Esquire the Third.
Sure. Do you find? 'Cause, I mean, you're somebody that wears a lot of hats, and we could start here. Yeah. Do you find like whenever you're meeting new people and people are asking like, so what are you into? Do you have to do you have a hard time answering that question simply, or do you like answer it just appropriately for the situation?
I answer it appropriately for the situation, and that frequently I lie because the worst thing you can do is when you're in like an Uber. The worst thing you can do is say that like you work in TV and film, or you're a comedian or anything, because either you need to give this person a joke or this person starts telling you about their movie idea. I got pitched to be in a movie by a guy one time in an Uber, and I was like, I don't think so, man.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Dude, it's rough. Like the Lyft driver thing is probably the worst because it's oh, you do music? Like I got a buddy that's a rapper and he wants to record some stuff, and I'm like, that's cool. Like. Yeah, I don't want to work with your friend. Like, I just kind of want to get, so you're in the middle of taking me from like, some bar on one side of town to like a house in the middle of nowhere, do you think I'm in any position to help you or your rapper friend?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things. That was it. And then now I'm engaged. You know, I've been in a happy relationship for a while, but when I was single, man, the amount of girls that thought like, oh, you're a stand-up comedian? I usually date sit-down comedians. Tee was like a good opening Tinder line, and you're like, block immediately.
Jesus Christ. That's the worst. So out of, everything you've been doing, let's try to get, the quick Cliff's Notes on Blayne Smith. Yes. So what came first, metal or comedy?
That's complicated, right? In terms of working in it, comedy, but in terms of like consuming it, it would be probably metal. Yeah. Did
you grow up in Canada? You from like always up there?
Always in Canada. I lived in France for a year in my 20s. But other than that, Toronto, the same city for the whole life.
Nice. Now, when it comes to Toronto and like a local metal scene, was that something that you were in, or was it more like finding out about bands through magazines and the internet?
Toronto, I feel like we have a similar problem to a lot of cities right now where all our venues are turning into like condos.
Sure.
But for a while, Toronto had like a really, really great music scene, and especially was good for all ages music, which is what really got me into it. At the time when I was younger, in my teens, I listened to a lot more punk because it was just, that was more what was going on in the city. And it was the kind of thing where there was this great, at the corner of Bathurst and Queen, which just felt like this really cool area of town. There was this giant building that's now a furniture store for condos. Not quite a condo. It's a condo furniture store.
It supplies condos.
And all levels of it was all part owned by the same person, but it was a different venue on each level. And there was the Cathedral, the Reverb, and on the top was Holy Joe's. It was the Big Bop building. And the Cathedral and the Reverb almost always were all ages shows. And, I think for a lot of people, especially if you're in like a smaller town, hearing that there was two venues on top of each other that had all ages shows 100% of the time is like pretty crazy for people. So that was definitely, I think, what really got me to love music so much, was just going and seeing bands that, either would wind up big bands or, were just local bands, but seeing them with like 40 people is so much nicer than seeing them with 500 people, which is so much nicer than seeing them with 3,000 people, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the comedy scene in Toronto, like how did you get introduced to that? Because I find that that's probably a lot more of a niche thing. So it's always interesting hearing people's stories about this.
Yeah, comedy's really weird because it's like, it's simultaneously like a niche thing and a massive thing, where it's like almost everybody can name comedians, and Netflix is the biggest contracts they've signed is generally with comedians. But when you say like, hey, who do you know locally that's a comedian, people are like, duh.
Sure.
It turned out it was like, this is how almost everybody gets into comedy, that whether they stick with it or drop. I met a guy who started doing comedy, and I sent him a message being like, hey man, I've always wanted to try stand-up. Can you, tell me how to do this? And he just like kind of brushed me off, like told me about a venue that did like a first timers night, and was just like, yeah, whatever, go here, man. And I did that. And then I wound up sticking with it. And then shortly after quickly realized that the instant you start doing comedy, like 8 guys that you like went to 1 year of university with just come out of the fucking woodwork, just being like, hey, wait, you can just do comedy? How no one told me that. How do I go do comedy? And then maybe they come out once or twice, and then never do it again. Or maybe they, go on to make it a career.
Now with, you in deciding to take that route of comedy, were you like a very social, outgoing, sort of on stage type of person? Were you playing in bands? Do you have any sort of a music background, like playing?
Yeah. I mean, I like I said, in high school, I was really into punk music, so I was doing that, and that's a nice way to easily get into music. It's a lot less of a steep hill to start
Sure,
to jam
sure.
with some friends in a punk band than playing in a metal band. And then I was in that little peak period where noise music got kind of big for a while, around the time like Lightning Bolt was really making like noise, weird kind of stuff popular. So I did some noise music. I played in a warehouse and accidentally set someone on fire. The normal noise musician stories.
Oh yeah.
And then coincidentally, also just in school, it was like a weird thing where in school I was always the person that wanted to do like presentations. I just liked doing presentations, and I had this weird thing. A trick I'd always use on teachers, which is I always wanted to do presentations, but I always wanted to do them alone. And so I would go to the professor or teacher, and you can try this if you're younger and still in school listening to this. And I would go, because they always need someone to go first, because it would happen over like a month, right? Because you can only have so many presentations. And so I'd always go, hey, I'll go first if you let me do it alone, because they could never get anyone to go first. And they'd be like, I guess, sure, that's less work for me. Fine, you helped me out a little bit there. And it always worked, and it always made presentations actually fun, as opposed to like, oh God, Jimmy's not showing up with the handout. What a dickhead.
Now with, getting into doing the comedy and being on stage, did you find yourself in like significantly different crowds than you were used to being in, like being in metal shows and being around kids lighting themselves on fire during noise sets and shit like that?
Yeah.
Like what was the crowd adjustment like?
It definitely was like kind of the first time in my life that I started hanging out with people that were like, because like when you're hanging out in music scenes, like comedy is still like the kind of same bonding thing. But really, if you're hanging out in a music scene, you tend to meet a lot of people that have very similar stories to yourself, very similar, backgrounds, come from the same place, like a lot of the same other things. But with comedy, like there's not really like genres in comedy. So I'm doing comedy with, literally everybody else that's doing comedy. There's no real dividers. So it was wildly different. It was the first time in my life I ever hung out with people where it was like, we had one mutual interest, and it was comedy. And then everything else was different.
Yeah. And I think that it's not entirely, impossible, I think, for some people in comedy to find that same bond that maybe we find with metalheads. Because there is kind of like, there's definitely genres of comedy, even if there isn't like, it's not billed as shows like that. Yeah. There's definitely styles of comedians. And like a lot of the comedians that I know locally, like they're all the same person in this like weird way. There's always the outliers, but a lot of them are the same people. So I imagine, you standing out, did you find it was easier for you to find a voice as a comedian being on stage, since you had like maybe a different background from a lot of other people in the scene?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is kind of that immediate thing where you're suddenly, at the very least, you're more recognizable because you get on stage. And there's a joke where it's like, if you're lining up comedians, it's like 8 guys in flannel shirts with beards that are like a little portly. And then some guy gets on stage, and like at first I was just going like full metal on stage. I was wearing a battle vest. I was cut off sleeves, just really being like, I'm a metalhead and you're going to know a metalhead immediately. So it at first it definitely gave me like a good jump off the starting line, but then eventually I had to realize a little bit of balance with it, because being on stage is kind of like a magnifying glass for whatever it is about you. Like if you're a little overweight, you're a fat guy on stage. If you have sex with people, sometimes you're a slut on stage. And so like, you don't need to be like full metalhead. Like going on stage like this, they know I'm a metalhead. I don't need to be doing the whole thing to kind of get that surprise factor.
Yeah, I imagine it can be really, really hard when you step onto stage being like a little over the top, because now all of a sudden people have these expectations of you. Like, is this a gimmick? Is this fucking guy for real? Like, oh, what's going to be so funny about this guy? But that's probably no different whether or not you have the battle fest or the flannel or whatever. I think comedy's a really, really intimidating seeming thing, but life's intimidating in general. I try not to overthink it too much. I've never thought about doing comedy though, personally.
Right. It's a weird thing where a lot of people are like, wow, that's so scary. And then you're like, what do you do for a living? And they're like, they say something, you're like, oh, that seems like a fucking terrifying.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, sure. Like they're like, oh, I teach children. And you're like, oh my God, like you could just fucking ruin like 30 people for the rest of their lives. Like that's crazy. Like we all remember a teacher where we're like, that teacher's whole thing was they were mean to 5-year-olds. Like that was their shtick in school. It was like, oh, that's the mean teacher. You're like, you could just be fucking scarring children for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Now, as you know, time has gone on and we are now in the digital age. There's all of these interesting ways that we get to talk and communicate and get our message out to people. This right now is an example. I am in the United States. You are in Canada. We are talking in real time over the internet about life. Pretty cool. And you are somebody that has taken advantage of these platforms and you do, video reviews of heavy metals things online. You do live streaming and all that. What has that been like? 'Cause I imagine, okay. Actually, before I ask this question, when did you start doing stand-up?
I started doing stand-up probably 8 years ago, I think.
Okay. So that was like right around the time that, that's 2012. Instagram's new. Social media is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger thing. Over the course of, we'll just say the past decade, how has the internet changed and shaped your career?
Well, the thing was kind of, because at first I was like trying to do comedy and I was just going out and doing it live and then not really kind of thinking about the other stuff. And then I started wanting to kind of explore and I made a web series with some friends, just super low budgety, just did everything ourselves. And it was really fun. And it started being like, oh, you can, like, it was really interesting because a lot of comedy is focused on your local scene. Like comedy is very cliquey, very, very like pecking ordery type of thing. And it's like, oh, I get on these shows in town. And then outside of the town, nobody knows or gives a shit who you are.
Sure.
And then all these tools, I started using them. And suddenly it's like, well, it doesn't even really matter what my place in this local comedy scene is because now I have like an actual fan base, which is, the thing that we're all going for. And it's like the speed at which you can get a fan base by putting like 4 YouTube videos out there versus doing like 40 shows in and around where you live is like, it's not even, you might get one fan out of doing all the shows, but a couple of videos and suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, here's a career path for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really wild how you're starting to see this like change the way that a lot of bands are starting to finally like focus on how to promote their stuff, especially like local and DIY bands. I've been yelling at bands on this podcast for years to be like, be more self-sufficient. You have this crazy tool. You have this thing. You could do shit on it other than Tinder, fucking be productive with your band. Don't fucking complain on Facebook about shitty shows. Invite people to things, film videos. Yeah. It's like the fucking cameras and everything that we have on this shit. Like you could do great things super easily. It's like, how motivated are you really?
My buddy, Daniel DK, guitar player and Exciter, works with me at Banger. He had always been good at social media with his previous bands, using Twitter and crowdfunding and that kind of stuff. But he didn't play any video games ever. So he had no idea what Twitch was. Twitch was like this totally foreign, because until like really the pandemic has kind of been, there's always been other stuff happening on Twitch, but the pandemic has really taken Twitch out of the kind of hands of gamers and kind of just shown it to everybody.
Yeah.
I was always like, you need to get on Twitch. Just get on Twitch and play guitar. When you're practicing guitar, just do it on Twitch. And he was like, whatever. And then the pandemic, he can't play live anymore. And that was his main source of income. And he was like, shit, what do I do? And I was like, dude, just Twitch stream. Everybody's online right now. He started Twitch streaming, and within like a couple months, it's now his main form of income. He's doing great. It took him like 2 or 3 months of trying it to suddenly be like, oh, wow, this is now my most stable source of income in my life. That's like replacing what I used to get playing live. And I'm just sitting here practicing guitar, playing songs I like while people like chat with me. You know, there's a lot worse things you can do for money, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think that it's awesome to see people taking advantage of these things and, you know, really thinking more of that like self-sufficient entrepreneurial brain, just using these tools that we literally just fucking have laying around. There's like no excuse not to be doing this shit unless you just really don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of people talk about like the dangers of social media, and I think there's a lot of that, and I think you have to be really careful. But at the same time, it's like there's also a way to like really use this stuff to have a pretty nice life.
Sure.
That's like, you know, fulfilled and happy, and you know, just you know, it's like anything. It's like drinking, right? You know, there's an amount of drinking that makes life awesome, and there's an amount of drinking that makes life awful. Sure. And you know, it's just about staying on that path.
I always tell people online, like when it comes to social media, you really choose your own hell. You pick who you're friends with, you pick what you interact with, you pick who you follow. Just be aware. Just be aware.
Yeah.
You know, don't complain about fucking, you know, seeing nothing but political articles if all you do is share and comment on people's political articles.
I know, right?
The internet doesn't know, you know. It's just like, oh, Billy likes this stuff. Let's keep sending it to him.
I'm listening to a podcast, a New York Times podcast called Rabbit Hole, and it's all about like YouTube algorithm, like radicalizing young guys, blah blah blah. And then I open up my YouTube, and it's just like metal albums and Tekken combos. It's just nothing. I'm like, how the hell are people finding political shit on this website?
Sure.
I don't see any of that. I'm watching a guy paint some miniatures.
Definitely. You definitely choose your own hell as far as the internet goes. Now, speaking of choosing your own hell, that sounds like a heavy metal album. And thinking about heavy metal and thinking about comedy, you know, there's a thing where I'm a goofball. I've always been a goofball, but I've always liked heavy metal. I grew up with heavy metal. My parents were metalheads, and I don't find that it's like that weird for those worlds to come together. And I know when to take things seriously and when not to. But as I'm sure you're very aware, and I'm sure you've dealt with, there are a lot of people that do not find any humor in anything, particularly metal. Yeah. So how have you dealt with that over the course of just like, you know, you being you in the metal community?
It's definitely one of those things where a thing that I found really helpful was I was reading a lot about like human loss aversion. I know to take this to a weird spot,
go for it.
Which was really useful. Where it's, you know, there's a lot of discussion right now about how humans are very loss averse. We don't like to lose. We don't want to lose things. So when we're looking at videos or our posts and stuff, and we can have you can get 50 nice comments and you can get 10 mean comments, and all you think about are those 10 mean comments. Like I can sum it up in my head, mean comments easy that have happened years ago, easier than some nice things people have said recently, right?
Yeah.
And you just have to kind of realize like pay attention to how many negative comments you're actually getting. Like, yes, people are saying mean things, but really, there's a lot of people that in saying so nice things to me and sending me messages. Hey, man, your videos are very funny. Or, hey, man, I found my new favorite band because of you. And it's like, there's some guys that are mad because I'm left wing. And I mean, I'm never going to convert those people. So why would I dwell on those when I've got nice people saying nice things that I could spend my energy on, you know?
Absolutely.
That's really a thing I think is, if someone wants to have like an actual constructive debate with you about something they think you're doing that they don't like or whatever, have a conversation with that person. But if someone's like, we won't veer down it, but just realize that person, I mean, something's going on in their life that has caused them to not be stoked about something, and you have nothing to do with it. You just happen to walk in the frame. So slide past that. There's two metalheads that, you know, got attracted to metal because it's ridiculous and silly and over the top. And there's an element to funniness that they realize that most of these people are doing. And then there's the other half that are, you know, there's basically there's two metalheads, right? There's Varg and there's Fenriz, right? There's people that are funny, they're interesting, and then there's assholes.
Sure. Something that I've, really had to reckon with, I just recently turned 35. I'm not the oldest person in the world, but I'm not getting any younger. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm still playing in heavy metal bands. I'm still listening to heavy metal. And there's like this level of immaturity and adolescence to it that I think as you get older, it's kind of hard to reckon with it if you really think about it.
Yeah.
And just trying to be like okay with it. And I find like if there's no humor in this, like how could I really take myself that seriously, especially getting older? Yeah. And there are people that are way older than me that I've dealt with that are way serious. And it's like, yo, like we are talking about like, people in Halloween makeup yelling about the devil, dude. Like this is not like it's cool. It's art. It's fun. But like, bro, don't like base your whole like personality or fucking social view of life around heavy metal. Like there's more to life than that.
Well, especially because it's like you don't realize that I've gotten to spend a lot of time with a lot of musicians that a lot of people look up to, and the general one of the through lines about almost all those musicians is they don't want to talk about metal that much. Sure. They're doing it every day. They play it. It's not consuming their entire life 100%. They want to talk about a hobby they have that I've got this new hobby that I'm excited about, Yeah. And the other thing is 9 times out of 10, they're also always silly motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Like, the record is not an indication necessarily of their personality. Probably the band that I've become the best friends with since doing this is Bell Witch, and they make, sad hour-long albums that are one track, and then in person they are just always I was messaging Dylan the other day, and I was just a little back and forth exchange, and then he was like, "Oh, I thought about you and your fiance the other day. A book I was reading reminded me of you." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. What's the book?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a book about gravity. I couldn't put it down." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool. What was the?" "Oh, you fucking piece of shit."
Yeah.
And this is the guy with like a fucking 40-string bass making 90-minute long single sad songs.
Uh-huh.
And this is how he talks to people. So consider that, don't get too into thinking you've got to be a specific way. Everybody is a normal human being that likes to have fun.
I think that the best case scenario for an artist is that, everybody has shit that they go through. And maybe the best case scenario is that you get that out through your art and through your music. And, then in your personal life, you can just be chill because you have that release for all of those things. Recently I had Alan from Black Dahlia Murder on the show, and he is making fish tanks out of old tube televisions as a hobby right now.
Yeah.
So it's just like, what the fuck, dude? But it's super cool because it's like, he doesn't want to talk to me about drums for a fucking hour. So it's and I totally get it because there's times when I'm out and about and I run into somebody that I haven't seen in a while. And okay, I got a night out. I'm away from the studio. I'm away from this or that. And then the next thing I know, how's the album going? How's things, and then I'm talking about it again. You don't want to be rude to people that are genuinely interested in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's hard, I think, when you're in a band or you have a podcast or you're doing these things and people listen to you more than you realize, which is kind of weird. You run into them in person and they want to talk to you about those things. They want to talk to you about the podcast that they listened to or the album review that they saw or and it's shit, I can't get a break from this, but also I don't want to break from it because I love having this life. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. One of the things that I picked up that, I always thought was good was that a nice way to break that is to ask about them. The person that's excited about you, because then they're really happy about that. I remember it was weird. Lamb of God, big band. I'm more black metal, death metal. The American groove scene was never something that I just don't know that much about. So, I'm obviously aware of Lamb of God. I know what their music sounds like. But we were Slayer. It was the Slayer the final Slayer tour.
Yeah.
And we were all the Banger crew was all going as a workouting. It was really nice. And Sam's friends with Lamb of God. He's been promoting them and cheerleading for them since they were a fairly small band. And so he's like, oh, I got to go see Lamb of God. We should all go see Lamb of God, you know? And so we go up to their dressing room, and they're about to go on in like maybe like 30 minutes. And so they're kind of practicing and getting ready. And they're like, oh, cool. Thanks for coming up, guys. How are you guys doing? Good. How are you doing? Good. So what's your name? What do you do? And I'm like, what? I'm like, oh, I'm a comedian. And he's like, oh, sweet. I really like comedy. We talked a little bit about comedy, and it's like, you know, they did not want to be asked questions about themselves, right? They don't want to fucking talk about themselves.
Yeah.
They're about to go on stage. They're going to have to do that for a good portion of the night. They're just, oh, what do you do? Oh, comedy. Cool. I like comedy. And I was like, man, you know, someone in Lamb of God doing that to me, I can certainly do that to someone that comes up to me at a show and it like compliments, you know, just asking people's names and shit, just shaking their hand and being like, oh, cool. Thanks, man. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is your favorite band on the show tonight? Oh, sweet. Yeah, I love that album too. Blah, blah.
Now, in terms of you listening to music and doing album reviews, this is a thing that you do on YouTube, on Banger TV. I'm curious, you know, as a music listener, when you get into doing album reviews and all of these things, like over the years, has this like changed the way that you digest or think about music? Like, did you analyze music differently before album reviews?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly has. I think the thing is, it really just makes you want. I found before a lot of what I was doing was I was trying to find bands that sound exactly like a band. You know what I mean? You'd like find this one band you like, and you're like, this band's sick. How do I find 10 more bands that sound just like this? And then after like the amount of music I've listened to is quite high at this point now. It's really like, where's a band that sounds like not the last 40 albums I've had to listen to? It really has made me crave. And I think it's like a thing that people sometimes don't understand why reviewers are like constantly praising things that are different. They're like, well, I love the old school death metal sound, and you guys like, everybody's really excited about Tomb Mold right now. And there's people that are like, why are you excited about Tomb Mold? It's just, I don't like it. It's pretending to be old school death metal or something. And you're like, well, it's because we've listened to a lot of death metal over the years. And this is like, oh, this is familiar, but different. Yay. Thank God.
It's like, you know, like the first time you're in New York City and you're like, I'm going to get some pizza. I have to try all the pizza that I possibly can. And then, you know, after a while, like maybe if you're in like Manhattan for a week on some bullshit, you're all of a sudden you're just like, man, I don't want to eat another fucking slice of pizza again. Right? I don't care.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time in New York in my life, and the instant I touched down in New York, I'm like, get me away from Manhattan into a borough, dear fucking God.
Sure, absolutely. Every time I don't know when the fuck I'm going to be able to go back, but I have a family member that lives in Hell's Kitchen. I always stay with him, so it's like shit, like. Cool, like it's a free place to stay, so that's tight, but you're like in the middle of like the worst. There's like a couple decent restaurants, but other than that, it's like, get me the fuck out of here. So, you know, over the course of time, have you always been somebody that was like listening to metal and like metal like being your main thing? Or, you know, over the years, or maybe even, because I mean, you mentioned that you like were listening to punk and shit like that as a kid. I guess the question I want to ask, and I apologize for rambling, and I'm formulating this in my brain as I go on.
It's a podcast. It's professional rambling.
Fuck yeah. I appreciate your support. So now, is there any styles of music that you are into that maybe, you know, would surprise people, or things that you just typically listen to when you don't have to do album reviews or you're not in the mood for metal? Like, what is the musical escape for Blayne Smith?
I listen to you know, it's cliche. It's both cliche to say I only listen to metal and to say I listen to everything, but I do really like pretty much listen to everything. I mean, like I said, you know, I grew up listening to a fair amount of punk music as well, so I'll still put punk on. It's generally like I'm not consuming as much new punk. A lot of it is like tied to nostalgia, but you know, I'll still put on those records. I mean, I like a lot of hip hop. Speaking of New York, I really like 2000s era New York hip hop.
Okay.
Just, you know, the Cameron is one of my favorites of all time, just because like there's it combines things that I really like, which is sampling. I think is a thing that should make a lot of sense to metalheads, which is a lot of sampling is like a guy with like a really obsessive music knowledge finding a really cool old relic and then like doing something new with it, which feels very much like what we do as well. And then if it's the right rapper, Jesus Christ, some of the lines are just really great, funny roasts. Like the most Cameron songs, they're just funny roasts. If you just took the beat away, he could be doing stand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so you have that comedy element that balances into it. And I think that as somebody growing up through, like, I was in, high school when all of that stuff was happening. So it was around me and a big part of the culture in the school that I went to. So I find that I was really attracted to like the humor and a lot of that stuff as well, because there would be like these really like heavy, good, like, pounding beats that just like, it's not like metal heavy, but it's like, it still gets your head bobbing in the same way. And then you have somebody just kind of being silly on top of it. And I feel like I can kind of relate to it. I can't relate to like serious rap, but it's funny because on the flip, I have a hard time relating to goofy metal. Like I like serious metal, but I don't like goofy metal. But I always have a hard time connecting with serious rap, but I like goofy rap. Like that's a strange juxtaposition.
Well, I think it's a little bit like the kind of the silliness you're getting from metal is from a lot of like the pageantry, to I think it's kind of the best term for it. So you're already getting like, there's already a silliness quotient that's satisfying you. So when you put that with the metal is also intentionally silly, you're just getting, it's like a sugar overload. You know what I mean? You're drinking Jolt Cola there and you're feeling nauseous. Whereas with rap, it's, the silliness is coming from the lyrics, but then the beat is just like, oh, cool, nice beat, cool sample. They found some weird jazz and old jazz song and they sped it up. Sick.
So, being from Toronto, what are your thoughts on Drake?
That's a
hot button topic.
Just to really sound Canadian, Drake's a weird one for me because we didn't know each other, but we did go to high school together.
Okay.
Because of course, you gotta. Hey, do you know so and so from Canada? Sometimes you're like, fuck yes. That's kind of been like it's. I wish I was excited about Drake because it's always cool to have like a hometown hero. But the thing that I most like about rap, he doesn't really have, which is he's not particularly funny. And he's kind of ushered in that era of like, he didn't pioneer it or anything, but the like Fruity Loops 808 drums and that's your beat is like rough.
Sure.
if one of your favorite things about hip hop was sampling, it's just like, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there was a really interesting thing that happened in hip hop, like in that era where you're talking about, where like the music of it really got stripped back and it became kind of amateur, which is fine. But like somehow the amateur sound became very popular and it became what everybody was trying to do. And like it became just so much about the personality on top of this very simple beat. And it's like, okay, like anybody that can dress well and look good and sound cool for 2.5 minutes can be has a chance of being a good rapper right now.
Yeah, I mean, especially with auto-tune, where it's like I don't hate auto-tune in the way a lot of people do. I think sometimes auto-tune's like really funny and I mean, hey, that Cher song, Do You Believe in Love After Love? Hey, that song's pretty sick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you combine that, and I mean, there's always that like it's bad, and then there's a good silver lining, and that silver lining has a bad aspect where there's certainly it's kind of like it's like got a little bit of a punk element to it, where there have been some people that like have been able to like kind of communicate things in an interesting way because it's so accessible now, where you can literally just be like, all right, well, I fill around with that 808 drum sound for like a day and you can probably mash out a respectable beat now. And then if you have an idea, you can put it over top, and then maybe, I don't particularly enjoy the way the music sounds, but there's that guy Juice WRLD who died of a drug drug complications, like took off alive and landed dead. And he has a song where it's basically, I mean, it basically is like, it's like almost Amy Winehouse, like forecasting his death. And you're like, if you ever struggled with addiction and depression and stuff, you can really relate to what he's saying. And you're like, oh, it's cool that guy was able to just put that out there. I don't particularly like it, but I can see at least some value in that one. Whereas like then another one, you're like, okay, well, this just fucking sucks.
Sure. Speaking about the, introduction of technology into music. This is something that, the heavy metal world has certainly not been, free of by any means.
Yeah.
I keep, joking around like with all, like a lot of my friends that are into like tech death and stuff. I'm like, this is electronic music. Like,
yeah.
It's like they're playing guitars into computers. Everything's getting fixed. Yeah. Everything's resampled. And that's fine. Like it sounds fun. Like this is really cool, but you're just listening to really aggressive electronic music.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on like, modern metal production? Like very modern metal production.
Yeah. I tend to hate it. Yeah, definitely. I always say the unique corner of metal that really turned me from like a metal fan into like a metal head, like dedicated life to, from more than just enjoying the music, was like shitty, like depressive black metal. Just like one guy, sometimes a drum machine because he doesn't know any fucking drummers, because he doesn't have any friends, and he lives in like Bavaria in the middle of nowhere. And he just is cranking out this stuff that he recorded at home on a 4-track he found at the side of the road. Like, that was that always has such a like just again that punk kind of just like, I just want to get this out there any way I can. And yeah, when you get that kind of all the computers involved and everything's it's I like seeing shows live. That's always been what's connected me to music. So I hate live albums, but I like an album with a live sound to it.
Sure, I know what you mean. It's so weird now because, I don't do album reviews really by any stretch of the imagination like you do, but I record a lot of music and I listen to a lot of music. So my brain is definitely kind of broken. I don't listen to music the same way that I did when I was 14. I kind of miss it because there's a lot of stuff that I have a hard time going back and listening to because I'm like, this sounds like shit, or just whatever, nerdy fucking reason I have. And, with all of the technology stuff, it's like, it's so strange to me. I think like, what was like, maybe like, who was like Rings of Saturn? Was that like one of those bands that, started doing all that crazy stuff? Or even like before that, remember like Psyopus? Like these were like bands that like, like the stuff's cool, but like people are like, you gotta check this out. It's fucking crazy. And then like, being from like a recording background and knowing how things are done. And like, even like, I've had talks with somebody that recorded Rings of Saturn actually, and talked a bit about their production process. And I was like, oh, I totally get it. It's hard for me to appreciate this the way that I feel a lot of people appreciate it now. Like knowing the techniques that go into it, it's still interesting. It's like, it would be like really hypocritical of me to be like, this isn't music, but say like, oh, sampling's dope in a weird way. It's like they're kind of like sampling small guitar loops and then like speeding them up and like, doing, it's like, it is sampling. So it's weird how all of that stuff like really comes together.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a quick aside. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's this guy, I guess, I don't know. Maybe he has a website or something. But I don't know if you've seen it. There's a Facebook group dedicated to people posting messages and bands' responses to him, where he just messages, "Hi, blank insert band name. Like, did you record your album using 100% natural drums, no triggers or drum samples?" People just being like, "Eat a dick."
Dude, it's fun. We've actually gotten messages like that. Us. And like, we're not anybody, we're just a little band here, doing our thing. But we've definitely got those messages from people. And I'm just like, yes, the album doesn't sound that good. It was obviously recorded live. But what's really funny on the flip of that, we've actually had, going back to that, the negative comments that always stick out.
Yeah.
Plenty of nice comments, people being like, hey, sounds good, like the songs, blah, blah, blah. Cool, thank you. But there's, we've gotten comments that have been like, hey, like, this sounds cheap because the drums aren't triggered.
Yeah.
And like how the modern metal listener, their ears have become adjusted to something that's not real. It's like the equivalent of like guys drooling over, you know, girls that have face tuned their fucking face. It's like, this isn't real, you know, like what you're hearing isn't real. What you're seeing isn't real. But like, that's what they want. And it's so difficult to be in that position where, you know, we are, you know, we like modern metal, but we all have that punk background. And like, we also come from that, like, you know, all the albums that we love are from like the late 90s, early 2000s. And like that sound like wasn't a thing then, you know, like even like stuff that sounded highly digital, like Fear Factory back then. Like Fear Factory now, like, you know, I listened to that recently, Obsolete, and like that album, you know, it holds up, but it's like, it doesn't sound anywhere near as like technical digital as like the most like modern production does now. And at the time that was like crazy, but now it just sounds like everything sounds like that now. It's so weird. And you know, our background just coming from that place of wanting to be a band that's like, oh, we want to record everything live because we can record it live and it's easier to record it live, honestly. But you know, we also want people to like it. So but also it's like most people do like it. Like, why are we going out of our way to help or, you know, pacify that one negative person that even if it sounded good, they're probably going to find something else they don't fucking like about it because people were just grumpy.
Yeah. One of the coolest things that I kind of got to see, you know, into the kitchen when you start doing comedy is when people start recording albums. You got, you know, your friends recording an album, and the way comedy albums are recorded is like you'll do, you know, if you're like a more amateur comedian, you'll do 2 shows, but there are guys that do like 5-show weekends and they record every show, and then they'll hear how each bit landed with each audience and go, okay, I'll take this bit from Friday's show, this bit from the Saturday late show, this bit from the Sunday early show, because you have to record comedy live, and recording one show is you're being very brave. Sure. Because I mean, all it takes is one drunk audience member, or I mean, the one of my favorite things about comedy is that the best comedians, whoever you think is the funniest comedian in the world, still probably bombs like maybe like once every couple months. They still go out and like die a brutal death.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, again, I do not do stand-up comedy, but just as a performer, I imagine, you know, there's just so many variables that you can't control, and like things that you don't really expect. Like if I'm in a room and if like the sound is off, like if it's like this weird venue that makes us have like low stage volume because they're miking everything, but the monitors sound like dog shit. So it just, if I can hear myself screaming too loud, I'm like, what the fuck? It throws everything off, and like, it just fucks shit up. And I'm sure the same thing can happen with you if there's like a weird light that can't be moved, or you know, that one person in the audience is just hella distracting, or like I imagine like just the science of how a room is set up really helps with comedy.
100%. Yeah, there is a lot of like, there's this weird thing where the best comedy room is kind of the opposite of like the best. Like venues tend to be really great if they're like narrow and long, right? Sure. Whereas comedy, you basically want to perform for like a flat line. Yeah. You want that to be as wide as possible and as like shallow as possible with getting as many people in there. It's really weird, the difference. But the thing, again, sometimes there's you can pinpoint a reason. Sometimes you go out and it's in your favorite venue and you see some people in the crowd that look like, oh man, that guy's got a band shirt on, sick. You go out there and it just doesn't work, and you're performing your ass off and it's just not landing. And the first time it happens to you, it's like it ruins your month. Like you can't forget about it. And then eventually, like for me, it's now like one of my most favorite times on stage will be those times, because you can instantly be like, all right, well, this show is, I've tried to save it. I've spent 10 minutes trying to wrestle this out of the toilet. It's in there. I'm just going to do everything I want to do on stage. Personally, I don't give a fuck how they feel about it. I'm going to try all kinds of shit. I'm going to goof around. I'm going to do whatever I want. And then those are the times where you just get to have the most fun and you get to learn the most. And there was a show I was on where I went on and I was just bombing. And it was in my favorite club, Comedy Bar in Toronto. Comedy Bar has like my crowd. The show was going well. It wasn't like a lame crowd or anything. And I was just bombing. And I went, am I your least favorite comic you've seen tonight? And everybody went, yes. And I went, okay, well, you trust me. Now that I know that, by the end of my set, I am going to be the second worst comic you saw tonight. And I just fucked around and had a blast. And then I was like, was I the second worst comic you saw tonight? And everybody was like, yeah. It was like, it was one of my favorite memories is a show that went the second worst of 8 people.
I know that, it's my understanding that the world of stand-up can be like pretty cutthroat because of just how many people were trying to do it and like fight for time and things like that. Yeah. But I think that maybe that's also more of a product of a bigger city, like a New York or an LA or things like that. Have you spent any time in either of the cities trying to do comedy, and what was it like?
I've done comedy a lot in Toronto and Canada, and then I've toured a bit of the East Coast, and I've done Europe and a little bit. And the weird thing that people don't remember about Toronto a lot of times is it's now bigger than Chicago. It's the 3rd largest city in North America. So New York's is obviously insane. Like it's like you have to bottom rung. You have to pay for stage time. It's called pay to play shows. You'll give them $5 for a spot.
In New York?
In most cities, like if you try and start a show like that, you're a fucking criminal. Get the hell out of here. We hate you. You're run out of the comedy scene with pitchforks. In New York, it's just like there's so many crazy people that's how you need a filtering mechanism.
Yeah.
Because the problem is that for a band, you at least need to be able to fumble together a couple of chords to be able to get on stage. You need to be able to, like that, you need to at least be able to do that. With comedy, you can literally walk in off the street after getting a piece of your brain removed. And at an open mic, you get 5 minutes. So there's definitely like getting noticed at first takes like a lot of work because A, you suck. B, people don't know if you're ever going to be good. So they don't know if they want to invest any time in you. And B or C, people quit like crazy because it is like a really thankless thing, right? And it really sucks. It happens to you a couple times and you get really jaded where you like meet someone and you're like, damn, I love this guy. Damn, this chick's wicked. Let's be best friends. And you're hanging out every day because you're going out and grinding shows. And then they're like, I got a job at an advertising firm. It pays $80,000 a year. I'm never doing stand-up again. And you're like, all right, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. One of the hardest things, just even as a musician, I've dealt with it because there are people that just grow out of it. And like, I mean, I already said, I'm not getting any fucking younger. And the interesting thing, the other thing that I have to reckon with whenever shows come back is, we are constantly in rooms with people between 18 and 25.
Yeah.
And like over time, it starts to feel weirder and weirder. It first happened a couple years ago. I was playing a house show, and house shows used to be the jam. Like I still love the concept of a house show, but okay, I am 32 years old. I'm in a basement with a bunch of underage kids drinking. Why am I here? Like, I'm happy that this exists. I came out of this, but maybe it's my time to move on and, pass the torch down to the younger bands and let them do the basement shit. It's so like heartbreaking, but also it's like, I know it's time for me to move on. And then it makes it hard for me to like, I've definitely been bummed out by like bands that I'm friends with that were fucking awesome bands. I would love like, them coming out to like playing shows with them, hanging out with them at shows. And, all these motherfuckers, once they stop playing in bands, they stop coming to the shows. So it's just like, you don't fucking see these people anymore, unless, fucking Meshuggah's in town or some shit, and you see everybody in the parking lot for like an hour. But it's so weird just how like people move on, but you can't blame them because like none of us are really getting rich off of this.
Why, you don't want to make $25,000 a year for the rest of your life? Come on, poser.
And like also too, I think it's just a matter of like, you can't expect everybody to be as passionate about this as you are. And it's just that is how it is. So it's like, as long as you're happy, if people are like, moving on, getting that good job and they're happy about it, buying their house with the family and the dog and they're stoked. Cool. I'm stoked for you. But, there's definitely been people that I've met that have been like, just kind of like real bummed out. And like they're always talking about, like, oh, I wish I was still doing that. How's it going, man? Like whenever you see them, like, it's like, fuck, man, this is like heartbreaking. This is like, you're like one of the best drummers I've ever known in my life. And now you're just like, not. It's so weird.
Yeah. It's weird because it's like when it's normal for people to change careers, but it's weird when your career is also like a hobby. Cause then it's like, you're like, well, what do you do now? What do you do with your time? It's so weird when someone stops doing stand-up, because generally the reason they stop doing stand-up is they can't go out 6 nights a week to perform for half the time for like $20, $0, a couple drink tickets. And that's the crazy thing about comedy is like, there's no point where you can really stop doing that. Like you'll hear Chris Rock be like, oh yeah, don't come and see me if you hear that I'm randomly doing a spot at the Comedy Cellar because I'm doing new material and it bombs. Like I'm figuring this shit out still. People don't like it. And you're like, well, because they're like expecting him to go out there and be this fucking phenom they've seen their whole life. And then he's like, fumbling through something that he's kind of thinking about that maybe doesn't like fully line up. It's like, what?
The interesting position for stand-up comedians, I imagine, is like you can't practice stand-up on your own. So it's like basically Chris Rock is inviting everyone to a band practice.
Yeah, 100%. You start to like get a sense that when because you write alone, right? You write your jokes and you get a sense sometimes when you get better at comedy, you start to figure out how to construct a joke, and then you write something and you'll get like a hunch. You'll be like, this I think is good. And you'll go out and sometimes it's good from the first time you tell it. But then sometimes you're like, this is genius. This is so funny. I love this. And then you go out and people are like, that's not funny. And you're like, no, it is. I know it's funny. And they're like, it's not. You're like, what the fuck? I tried to do it for a while. It never worked. Just a joke about how like female magicians don't exist and how women do not seem to have any interest in equalizing most careers. You want equal representation. There's stand up. There's a million great female stand-ups in Canada that are just always fighting for their place. Magicians, it's a bunch of weird guys. I wrote this joke and I was so excited about it. I was like, that's sick. I've never heard anyone say that. That's fucking it's gonna go viral. Get on stage. People are like, what are you talking about magicians for?
I have never seen a female magician.
You've never seen a female magician?
What the fuck?
The only laugh I got out of that joke was one time a guy was like, I know several female magicians, and no joke, he had a dead eye, like just an eye that was completely white. And I just went, of course you do, man. You got a fucking dead eye. And that got a laugh, but then nothing else in the joke did. I was like, all right, well, unless I can drag that guy with me to every show, I think I got to put this one to bed.
Weird. So weird. So you mentioned getting drink tickets in Toronto. So yes. I haven't been to Toronto in maybe like 4 or 5 years. And we met at Brutal Beer Fest here in Pittsburgh a few years ago. Now, when I was in Toronto, craft beer seemed to just not exist outside of like a couple tiny breweries. Has that changed much in the past few years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Banger is literally in the same building as a craft brewery.
Nice.
That we did a beer with a little while, like a couple years ago. Yeah, no, it's really It's really exploded. We had a couple, and then the problem was we were having for a little while, whereas like we get like a craft brewery, and then the craft brewery would be popular, and then it would be by like Molson, and then suddenly it like wasn't a craft brewery anymore. Like Mill Street for a while was like this nice little local brewery that was producing really good beer. Cool. And then, they got bought by Molson. It was like, well, I guess that's just a giant beer factory now. But yeah, we've got a million little pop-ups. There's like storefront breweries where it's like, it's like you go in and there's a little place. You can get a couple of eats. You can drink. And then you just see like, there's a giant silver vat behind where the people are serving you food from. And you're like, oh, I guess we're in a brewery. This is the size of my apartment. How are you doing this?
Yeah, it's pretty wild how it's blown up even here in the past few years. I mean, there's probably, 24 breweries within 15 minutes of my house right now. Yeah. It is exhausting. But I can't remember the name of the place. There was two places that we went to that I thought were decent when I was in Toronto. I don't remember. One of them was like on a rooftop somewhere. And the other one was by a record store. Alley Cat Records. There was one by a vinyl store that was a pretty decent vinyl store, and then the other one was on a rooftop. But again, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't remember the names of them.
Yeah, we've got some.
Toronto's
cool
big,
ones.
so
yeah. The issue. I mean, the issue we've always had is that Toronto is kind of similar to New York in that space is really premium, like small. Like you don't get a lot of space for the lot of money you have to put in. So things like breweries can be a little harder, where it's like, you need, ideally to run a proper brewery, you need like a slightly warehoused sizey space, which doesn't super exist in any sort of place that people are really hanging out a lot.
Sure.
Like we have a big brewery in the building. Henderson is in the building that our office is in, but we're beside a chocolate factory. Like we're in a industrial part of the city. So they're able to do that because there's a fucking chocolate factory beside it. It's Nestle, like the Nestle factory is beside it. So there's this massive chocolate factory. So it's just this waft competing smells at work of beer and chocolate.
Do you eat a lot of chocolate?
Yeah. It definitely like you're curious. You're like, the air smelling like chocolate. Would that be gross or would that be nice? It's very nice. It really makes you want chocolate.
Yeah, I imagine it wouldn't be too dissimilar from being next to like a coffee roastery. The same sort of notes in the air. Now, as we are rounding the corner here, I'm going to let you go in a minute. I do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about.
Hey, happy we finally got to link up,
Yeah. This pretty gosh darn cool. Speaking of things that are in Canada and food, I want to ask you about poutine. Do you still give a shit about poutine?
I mean, I'm vegan, so it's a little trickier for me. But yeah, man, poutine, like it's one of those things where it's like, it's really hard to not like understand people's infatuation, because it's like, it's basically the three best things, like from a really basic level in you too. It's not some like high fancy it's like French fries. So just a lot of carbs, meat, juice, and cheese. Yeah. it's the three things that like people are like, don't eat that. And you're like, I can't not eat it because it's so good. It's like the three things that are killing you, but you continue to eat because you don't care that it's killing you. So when you combine those together in a thing, it's really weird that it is even like a Canadian food. And you're not like, why isn't this just everywhere that has those three items? Why would those three items not just immediately be put together? Yeah,
what's pretty interesting is that like poutine's actually really easy to find here in Pittsburgh. Yeah. We have it everywhere, and it's always been around, but we're only like 5.5 hours apart. It's not that's separated.
Yeah, I've always said like I find a lot of commonalities between growing up in Toronto and the state of Pennsylvania, because we are both like functionally, conceptually, you go to the tent, we're both East Coast places that aren't on the East Coast, that aren't technically touching an ocean.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like there's the feeling of going to like, Philadelphia, New York, Toronto is like all the cities have a similar feel. There's differences, there's uniquenesses certainly, but really like the type of people you meet, everyone's attitude, everyone's behavior, it really blends together a lot. And so the like transport of poutine down is like the transport of like Rochester's commercials to my house, like growing up with Celino and Barnes commercials, despite the fact that I don't even live I don't live in the same country. I can't hire you guys as lawyers.
Yeah. Being a vegan in Toronto, is that pretty easy? I know that I remember seeing online recently you were doing like the vegan lasagna.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if like you were vegan or not. Me and my girlfriend are both vegetarian, so I eat a ton of vegan food. And we have like a ton of great vegan restaurants in Pittsburgh too. So it's really easy to be vegetarian or vegan here. But there's plenty places that I've been on the road where it's like, fuck, I am fucked. What's it like in Toronto?
Toronto is like, it's so easy. Like literally, my wife owns a vegan restaurant.
Oh, nice.
there's a shitload of them. They're really everywhere is kind of adopted that, especially when you're in a big, like once you're in the millions mark of your city population, I feel like you're like, well, most businesses are like, well, we have to accommodate these people. We don't like them, but they keep showing up. So throw some grilled veggies on a baguette and shut them the fuck up.
So,
but no, we have a lot of really great vegan food here.
The last question I'm going to leave you on, and I'm curious, what do you think this mysterious connection between heavy metal and veganism or vegetarianism is? Because on the surface, one may not expect it. One may expect that we're all eating, fucking goats and virgins 24/7, but we're all, very conscious about the environment and the world around us. What do you think that connection is?
I think a lot of it is that, I mean, especially for like the age range that we're in, like we grew up listening to some metal, but there was a lot of punk in there too. You can't tell me that you're in like your mid 30s and I have only listened to metal my whole life. I never liked any of that punk stuff. We kind of really grew up in like the second golden age of punk music, where it was like all these great bands making all these great records, and so many of them were so like aggressively left wing. I mean, I come from Canada. Propaganda's the pride of the Canadian punk scene, and you're like, you fucking put out a Propaganda record, and you feel bad when you're eating a sandwich. So I think a lot of it is just like growing up. There isn't really the punk and metal divide is like stupid and fake for a lot of, it's a lot of the same music. There's a lot of crossover. And I think a lot of us just grew up listening to punk rock, and there really is a value at 16 of just like really bluntly cramming some messaging into people. It's happening a little bit in the opposite direction these days. But we had a really great wave of like all the bands that were even the ones on MTV were like, be a better person. Sure.
I remember being like 12 years old and having a copy of Earth Crisis Breed the Killers, and they have their whole diatribe on the inside about I was like, what the fuck are they talking about? But it was like, it really like opened my eyes. And then like, listening to like Strife and all this like straight edge shit, where like the straight edge thing didn't really stick with me, but it kept me out of trouble through high school. Like, I didn't really start drinking until I was in my 20s, because of like, I was like, oh, this isn't a good idea. And I'm like listening to these bands and I have these values in me, and like, I grew out of it, but still it helped me. Like, I don't look down on any of that shit.
Yeah, I mean, I dabbled with, like, again, not officially, but I definitely so there was periods in time where I was listening to more straight edge music, so it was like affecting my consumption as a teen. And as an adult, I have drug problems. But all I can imagine is that if I didn't have that as a teen, I would have fucked everything up. Sure. I've got drug problems, but I can still own a house. You know what I mean? So they're it's more budgeting that's the problem than being like, oh no, I'm going to lose everything. It's like, well, no, I can't car insurance. I can't spend any more money on drugs this month.
I'm always like talking about, it's interesting. You bring up oh, like when we were kids, we all listened to this music and we all did this and that. But, as we get older, some people start taking things a little bit too seriously, or some people go off the deep end with the silliness and the drugs or whatever. And I'm always like thinking about like, when I'm at a show with people and there's like these weird cliques of different, those are the serious metal kids and those are the goofy ones or whatever. I'm like, if this was high school, we would all be sitting at the same lunch table together. We would all be homies. So I don't know like what changed and why we still can't just get along and like help make the scene bigger and better by just being friendly with each other. It's so weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing where it's like, we all also complain that like, oh, there's not enough money in music. And it's like, well, stop scaring off people that want to spend money. I remember, Hell's Headbangers is like a label that puts out a lot of great shit.
Yeah.
It's a cool label, certainly. But there was like, someone sent me a clip where they had mentioned Banger. This was years ago. They had mentioned Banger on the podcast, and they were talking about how they don't understand how like it's so hard to get money into metal. And then, people will do like nice production stuff, like Banger has all this nice production, but then they interview Rob Zombie and it's like, what the fuck, man? Why aren't you interviewing? And it's like, yeah, that's because to get that nice production and shit, you need some money and you got to interview fucking Rob Zombie sometimes, man. And then also like, if you're like 32, you probably, Rob Zombie is a big reason you listen to metal. So fucking let us use Rob Zombie to then be like, okay, Gall's also here fucking drinking wine and saying Satan. Like that's in the same documentary. Like, dude, do you not see that helps have those two sides?
Dude,
like,
motherfucker, you give me the option of talking to Rob Zombie or your grumpy ass, I'm picking Rob Zombie.
I know, right?
God damn it, dude. Who the fuck do you think you are?
Yeah. I mean, it's just weird. It's like, you gotta, again, you can't be too serious. You can't be too extreme too. I don't like listening to anything that like I would have to go to an arena to see. Like, I don't particularly care that much about Slayer. Like, like Sodom is like the biggest a band will get that I'm like super into. Cause it's like, it doesn't feel like it's mine once it's that big. It's like, every fucking loves Slayer, man. The fucking person that I just ran into on the street that looks totally normal probably knows a bunch of Slayer lyrics. Like, it doesn't grab me as much. But then you get like, a band like Hooded Menace where it's like, I feel like this is mine and I love this. And that's what I love about metal. But at the same time, I'm not like, you're a fucking idiot for liking the music you do. You like fucking, you like this big band? Fuck you. Get the fuck out of here. And it's like, take it down, bro. Yeah. Take it down. Just talk to them nicely, put on a record, and maybe you can help Hooded Menace make $28 tomorrow. Like that's
absolutely. Well, Blayne, thank you for taking the time to chat. It was real cool. I hope you, I wish you the best of luck in your Zoom poker later. I hope,
thank you.
I hope you make lots of money for more drugs and keeping the house over your head or whatever you got to do.
I really appreciate that. I'm glad like I said, it took a little while, but I'm glad we were able to finally do this. It was a lot of fun,
Hell yeah, dude. I appreciate it. Well, take care of yourself up there in Canada, and maybe one day I'll see you in the real world. Who knows?
I hope to do that.
Who knows?
I hope everything is okay with your state.
Yeah, things are a little wild right now.
I hope no one sets your state on fire, because there's a lot of people on every side that are maybe going to set your state on fire.
Yeah, so we're in the middle. Yeah. For anyone watching this in the future, it is November 5th. So we are right in the middle of all of the
people are counting right now. That's crazy. There's people counting right now.
Yeah, it is. Well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, definitely for some reason it's all falling on all our shoulders. I don't know. Anyways.
It's funny, this whole conversation, I just saw the Descendants tattoo.
Yeah.
I just caught Milo there.
Yeah,
so.
He's there. Yeah. So I have the same silly Epitaph Records background too. I mean, like, fuck, you know what I mean? I was like, 10 when Smash came out and I had a skateboard. So fuck.
Exactly.
Recipe for success.
That's the other thing, skateboarding. Right?
Yeah.
We were like Tony Hawk Pro Skater came out and you're like, well, I can't not skateboard.
Exactly.
And then if I'm skateboarding, I can't not listen to punk music.
Exactly. Well, before we go down another rabbit hole of skateboarding, maybe we'll do that next time. But until then, take care of yourself, dude. It was good seeing you, and peace out, man.
See you later, dude.
Adios, my friend.